Now, quickly before I get into the video, if you could drop a like and subscribe to the channel, that would be greatly appreciated. 2 days ago, Danny Ainge was the worst general manager of all time. He needed to be fired. He messed up for the Celtics. They could have had Miles Turner. They could have had the dream fit for the team. And instead, they traded Gordon Hayward away for seemingly nothing. He was a terrible GM. Now, fast forward 2 days later, and all of a sudden, he's got a trade exception. They got Tristan Thompson and Jeff Teague, who I'm going to talk about because I think they're great fits. And the Celtics are in a great position to do some things. Now, just to talk about the trade exception quickly, basically Batum, Hornets, Celtics, Clippers, that kind of stuff. And in the end, the Celtics now have a $28.7 million trade exception, the largest in league history, which I think only $21 million of that they can use without having to pay a significant amount of tax, which I think they'd look to avoid unless obviously you could get someone ridiculously good through the door that they just wouldn't be able to refuse. But I think if they had the chance, they would definitely look to avoid paying tax. So probably around $21 million is the cutoff. They can't stack salaries. You can't let go of a $10 million player and turn it into a $38 million player with the 28 and the 10, you know what I mean? So basically the Celtics have a great opportunity to trade away future picks, maybe a young player or two, for an established role player who can help them win now. And it's like I've said, this Celtics team has some good young players, arguably one of the best young duos, one of the best young cores in the league, but that doesn't mean anything going forward. At the moment, they've got as good an opportunity to win as they will in the next 5 years. Like, we don't know what 2022 holds. What we do know is they're coming off a series where they were neck and neck with the Heat and easily could have made it through to the finals. So right at this point in time, with the current roster they have, even with Hayward missing, I mean, he didn't really impact them during the playoffs. Good player, but during the playoffs, he was pretty non-existent. So even with him missing, this roster is good enough to go toe-to-toe with the team that made the finals. So that's the kind of roster you're looking at. And then you add Tristan Thompson, you add Jeff Teague, two great additions. I think Thompson is kind of underrated now because he got paid a lot when he wasn't worth that much during his time with LeBron. But in general, he's like a 10 and 10 kind of guy. He's even stretched the floor a bit last year. I don't expect that to kind of keep up because free throw percentage isn't great. That was on very limited attempts. But in a Celtics system where they love to move the ball, they love to get good looks, there's potential that he can stretch the floor a little bit. Like, it's there in his locker. He's kind of done it before. And then you bring in Jeff Teague on a very friendly contract as someone who can be a great backup point guard, someone off the bench who you know can do a job. Just two great acquisitions. And I think Miles Turner is kind of overrated. When you look at Daniel Tice and Turner's impact, there's really not a whole lot of difference. Either way, neither of those guys are stopping the biggest and best bigs in the league. When you look at Embiid, you look at Giannis, man to man, neither of those guys are going to do the job in terms of shooting, spacing. Tice does it a bit. Turner's obviously a better shooter, a better offensive player, but like in terms of a $5 million player allowing you to get Thompson and Teague and now having a trade exception as opposed to having Turner, I know who I'm picking. I think Tice isn't really that far away from Turner. And then the added players that you get by not having that hefty contract. Yeah, I don't think Turner's the be-all and end-all, and I don't think that was a bad player to miss out on, particularly now that they've got that trade exception that we'll talk about. That trade exception basically allows them a chance at a few different players that I've shortlisted. You've got Aaron Gordon, Jeremy Grant, Evan Fournier, Jordan Clarkson, Harrison Barnes, JJ Redick. Basically, I think there's two different prototypes that they're going for. You've got a 3-and-D type guy that every team wants, but a 3-and-D type guy that's not going to take the ball out of Kemba, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown's hands. He's just going to spot up. He's going to come off the bench. He might start some games, depending on the lineup. Who knows? Someone like a Harrison Barnes, someone like an Aaron Gordon. Versatile on defense, hopefully can guard positions 3, 4. That would be ideal. Someone like Gordon and Barnes can do that. Add Jeremy Grant to that list. That's one of the prototypes. And then the other prototype I would have is like a spark plug off the bench, an Evan Fournier, a Jordan Clarkson, a JJ Redick, a Terrence Ross. One of those guys that you know can come off the bench and give you 20 any night. Now, what this would tell me is they don't have a lot of faith in their young players to come through because you've got a few different players that could, in an ideal situation, provide that as rookies, as second-year players with Langford, Pritchard, even Naismith, all of these guys. That's kind of what their job's supposed to be coming into this year. So maybe you trade one of those away just for an established player and just think that, look, you've already got your two young assets that sacrificing a bit of your future for some present time isn't that big of a loss. So maybe that's what you do, or maybe you try to just trade away future draft picks and get one of those guys and then just kind of put Langford and those guys to the side for another year and hope they develop in the meantime. That's what that would be suggesting to me, though, because they've got players that kind of fit that position of need. In terms of a 3-and-D guy, yeah, Jeremy Grant would be fantastic if you could get him from the Pistons. I think he's gettable. I think that's why Detroit got him, because they know if they want to keep him, he's a good player to keep, but if they want to get rid of him, he's also going to get them value and a team that's rebuilding. He's one of the players that would make sense for the Celtics to inquire about, because he was literally just one of the best players for the Nuggets against the team that you're trying to beat in the LA Lakers if you make it that far. So he's proven that he can play in the playoffs. He can guard multiple positions. He can shoot the 3-ball. He can do a number of things. So if you could get him, that would be ideal. Aaron Gordon kind of along that mold, except not as good a shooter, not as good a defender. But I think in the right environment in Boston, where he can use his athleticism and his switchability to defend multiple positions. He has been a decent shooter before in the past. The year before, he was a pretty good shooter. This year, he just struggled overall. But if you can get the best out of him, which Boston will have a good chance to do, I think it's a better environment than Orlando. So if you can do that, I think he'd be a solid option. And then Barnes is the steady kind of guy that wouldn't cost as much because he's older, he's not on a great contract. And Sacramento, are they looking to compete? Are they not? I think if you give them picks, then they'd be happy to part ways with Harrison Barnes. So I think he's probably the safest and the easiest bet. If I was betting on someone to go the way of Boston, if they needed someone to go that way, it would be Barnes, because the other guys are probably a bit harder to pry away from their respective teams, given their age and given their ability. So I think Barnes would be a good fit, though. What he does is guards positions 3 and 4, can knock down shots, except in the finals for the Warriors. But I mean, maybe in the finals for the Celtics, things can change. So he can do those kind of things. And yeah, he's just a solid player. He would make a difference. Again, none of these players are going to change the game for the Celtics. But if you add another of these players to a team that's already very good, maybe that's enough to push them over the edge. Like, it's not like this team's lacking that much in any department. They've just filled probably their biggest position of need, a backup center, and got one of the best ones they could get in Thompson. They got a backup point guard in Teague. They drafted a sharpshooter in Aaron Naismith. They're going to get more development out of Tatum and Brown. Hopefully Kemba gets back to full health. We don't know, but they've got some backup point guards that could provide something. They've got a lot going for them. So clearly this team isn't in need of making a huge trade, although I wouldn't be opposed to that. But I think bringing in someone like a Barnes or a spark plug off the bench would be great for them. And I think overall that would be better than just trading Hayward for Turner. So all of a sudden, Danny Ainge doesn't look like the worst general manager of all time. Now, this is all potential. Obviously, the Celtics haven't done anything, and there's every chance they don't actually trade anything, and they don't think they can get the right value for a player. If there's anything we know about Danny Ainge, he's not going to give up an asset if he thinks he's getting finessed. I mean, we just saw that recently in Indiana. He didn't want to give up Hayward for Turner because he wanted another player in that deal. So he wasn't going to swallow his pride. He wasn't going to feel like another team was getting the better of him, particularly a team competing with him. So I expect nothing less. So I don't expect him to give up 4 first-round picks for Terrence Ross just because the Celtics need some scoring off the bench and have the trade exception. That's not going to happen. They'll let it ride if they have to. But if they have the opportunity to do so and the price is right, this is a real unique opportunity for the Celtics to get better, which a lot of teams don't have the opportunity to do so. And I think it's really interesting, and I think it's really good for Boston. Pretty much that's about it. The Celtics have a really nice opportunity with this trade exception they got. Keep in mind, you can't add on to the trade exception. You can't trade it for Blake Griffin. I know every team wants him, given how good he is, but you can't do that. What you can do is you can trade away a couple of picks for someone like a Jeremy Grant, and you can bring in someone that can make an instant impact to your team. And like some people might be opposed to doing this, trading away future assets for someone who can help them now, I'm definitely not, because as I've said, I don't think anything's guaranteed, even with a team as good as Boston. We don't know what Luka and the Mavs are going to look like, if they're going to have Giannis after free agency. We don't know if the league's going to be completely one-sided by that point in time. We know at this point in time, the league heading into this year is definitely open for anyone to win, particularly if you get some more development out of Tatum and Brown, and then you bring in another role player on top of the moves they've already made. The Celtics would be right in contention for winning a title, and I think that's what makes this trade option so enticing. But teams know that, and that's why Danny Ainge isn't going to want to give up too many assets in return. If you did enjoy the video, a like would be greatly appreciated. Subbing to the channel helps as well. Other than that, I'll catch you next time. Bye.